Jan, I often wonder, how could L. Ron Hubbard think that he knew what had happened trillions of years ago? And how could somebody believe this so obvious nonsense? This teaching seems to be an indicator that Hubbard was delusional, don't you think? Well, yeah, I do think Hubbard was delusional, but you know, delusion is quite an interesting thing. It's a state of mind, but it's also a based on, if you're going to look at somebody and say, well, are you delusional or not? You're going to evaluate how they're seeing the world against how you're seeing the world, and if how you're seeing the world is so perfect and sane and rational, and you're so 100% sure of that, then I guess you can draw that conclusion. But we base our facts and our ideas and what we accept as true quite a bit on, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said in Return of the Jedi, a great deal on our point of view, right? Many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our point of view. And when I, for example, I have to answer this question by saying, sure, L. Ron Hubbard was delusional, but so was I. Because I bought fully into the idea that we as spiritual entities have existed for a near infinity of time in the past. And the sales job to buy that particular piece of information wasn't particularly a really hard sell. If you believe that you are a spiritual entity or being who has lived, who occupies this body, then you go, okay, was I born with this body as a spiritual entity? Well, if the answer that your faith relies on is no, you've had other bodies in the past, then that immediately opens the door to the idea that you could have lived millions, billions, or even trillions of years, or an infinity of time. You've always been around, and you'll always be around. And that's actually a pretty comforting thought. It's not hard to see why somebody would buy into that. Almost all religions are selling immortality, the idea of continuing on past the death of this body. And that is an idea that gives a lot of people in this world, billions of people, a lot of comfort. The specifics of what that immortality is going to consist of vary from one religion to another. But the fundamental belief that there is immortality and that we will continue to live on, almost all religions have that in common. So, sure, Hubbard was delusional, I was delusional, but do I now get to say that every single Christian who watches this channel is delusional? Well, I'm not saying that, but according to this question, maybe I should. I mean, I don't know, right? How far do you take it? It all depends on your point of view. And these are things that we can talk about and subjectively argue about all day long, because there's no factual basis on which to say yay or nay to such a question as to whether we are spiritual beings or whether we have lived before, whether we will live again. Right? There's no proof of it one way or the other. There are lots of questions, lots and lots and lots of questions that we can bring up and talk about all day long, like I said. So, but without hard proof one way or the other, is it delusion? Right? Well, I've chosen to now change my beliefs about, whether I'm a spiritual entity and whether I have lived billions or trillions of years in the past. And I have chosen to now say, I think that's pretty delusional, because I look at all the things and all the reasons why I believe that. And I have changed my mind and perspective on why I believed those things. And therefore, I gave up those beliefs. This is why I say belief is a choice, because I can choose my beliefs. I now have some degree of hope that maybe there might be something more, and wouldn't that be nice? But I don't cling to that as a point of faith. I won't argue about that with anybody, because I have no proof or anything to fall back on with that. So that's also why I respect other people's beliefs when it comes to that, and don't just say that all Christians, Muslims, Hindus, or everybody else are all a bunch of delusional nutcases. I don't say that because I don't think I don't think I have a leg to stand on to say that sort of thing, right? So, I think, I don't mean to poo-poo this question. It's a good question. It's perfectly legitimate. But I think that, I'd love to have a more in-depth discussion with the person, Jan, who asked this question about, well, what do you believe? And how are you so sure that what you believe is or is not delusional, right? It's just it's just one of those philosophy 101 debate type questions. I don't mean any offense by this. I'm not trying to antagonize anybody, but I'm just sort of calling into question, how do we know? How do we know? And how do we know what we know, right? And why do we think these things? These are fascinating topics and definitely worthy of discussion. And so anyway, that's just a little bit of contribution to that I think, that I hope gives some broader context to the whole idea of belief and what's true and what's not.